This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Happy New Year to all of you. Hey, this is Greg, and this is the super-sized Steve McQueen episode. So this is a deep dive, a really deep dive in preparation for the sale of Steve McQueen's Bullitt Mustang at Mecum's Kissimmee sale. That's coming up next week. So today is going to be January the 2nd, and I believe it sells on January the 10th. So we won't be able to review the results till not next week, but the week after. So be sure to tune in for that. So I am doing a deep dive into the data to ballpark what I think this iconic Mustang will sell for. Now, this is a really deep dive. So be prepared, because I'm going to do a lot of talk about a lot of cars, a lot of prices, and a lot of things. So I'm going to calculate the Steve McQueen Multiplier, and I'll review the highest selling Mustangs, Shelbys, and famous movie cars of all time, and other iconic items of note, which will make more sense at the end here. All the data is sourced from Sports Car Market's Platinum Database, Hagerty's Valuation Tools, and the website links that are in this article that's being posted on my blog, which you can find at the collectorcarpodcast.com. So all of this info is available at the blog. Just click there's like 100 links in here. So there's a lot of info that you can look into. So Steve McQueen famously drove his dark Highland Green GT 390 Fastback in the most famous car chase scene ever in a movie. You'll have to check it out on YouTube. There's also a really cool 1969, I believe, black Dodge Charger that was destroyed apparently at some point. And the Mustang was a factory GT, but if you know anything about Mustangs, Steve McQueen wanted to be kind of inconspicuous since he's a detective in the movie. He took off the fog lights, took off the side C stripe, I believe, took any of the extra adornments off of the car to make it look really kind of cool and stealthy. So it's been called the greatest car chase scene ever by a lot of folks. I couldn't find any automobile magazines that reference it, but I'm sure they did. But the links I have on the blog, BBC America, Popular Mechanics, which is kind of interesting, Fandango, Napa had it as their top-ranked car chase scene ever, CNN, and Reader's Digest. So now 2 Mustangs were actually used in filming, and it's long been thought that one of them was crushed after filming because it was in such bad shape. And the hero car, the car that's coming up at Mecum next week, was hidden in a barn in Kentucky. About 10 years ago, I made a half-hearted effort to try to find it. I had read an article in Mustang Times about it, and I thought, I can find that car. And I never could. The folks from Charlie's Angels, the first Charlie's Angels movie, Drew Barrymore, she tried to buy it. Apparently, she found out about it. And anyways, the guy just didn't want to sell it. So it turns out both of the cars survived, and the crushed car just showed up in 2017 in Mexico. And it was interesting. It was sent to a restoration shop that specializes in making Shelby Eleanor clones from the movie Gone in 60 Seconds, which we'll talk about in a second. Well, when they researched the VIN number, they realized, wait a second, this is the second Mustang from Bullitt that was thought lost and gone. Unfortunately, a lot of the restoration work had already begun. So I think they're trying to save as much of the alterations that were made for the movie and not put it back to factory specs, because you don't want to lose all that history of it being one of the 2 Bullitt Mustang cars. The Mecum car is, as I said before, the hero car, and it's unrestored, and it came out of hiding a few years ago. It's been making a world tour, and the son, his dad had passed away, who bought it in 1974. His son has been touring the country, actually the world, I think, showing off this awesome car, and it actually was listed by the Historic Vehicle Register as the 21st car listed out of 26, I believe. And just for reference, the other movie cars that are on the register include the Tucker, and that was in the movie Tucker, obviously, about the making of those cars, and the fake Ferrari from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is pretty cool. That car actually just sold for really cheap. I want to say about $250,000. I think the concern there was they weren't sure it was the actual one from the movie. Now, to put into perspective how epic of a car this is and how big of a deal this auction is, I'm going to quote a few folks. So the first is a Bloomberg article by Hannah Elliott. She said, Bullitt is effectively a one-of-one example touched with the golden blessing of a car's culture's most important god. It has transcended into pop culture with few direct comparisons for which to predict a sale price, which means that how much it actually sells for next month is anyone's guess. Dana Mecum has said Bullitt will sell for at least $3 million. A recent Hagerty magazine article said at least $4 million, and Klinger himself said he expects it could take nearer to $5 million. I think he's one of the folks at Mecum. The article continues with a quote from Sam Murtaugh, who is Mecum's vice president of marketing. A movie car always has a multiple applied to it. When you add Steve McQueen factor, that multiple effect goes up exponentially. It varies depending on the item, whether it's a motorcycle or car he used to own. But with Bullitt being a movie and driven by McQueen, you've got a double multiple going on. And with McQueen, it has always been a multiplier of 10 or 15x. So we will see in a moment if Steve McQueen cars truly sell for 10 to 15 times their value. The Mustang is not being sold at one of the high-end auctions, which I find is pretty interesting. I would have chosen to sell it during Monterey Car Week just because you might get two billionaires that get into a bidding war. But anyone who has interest in this car knows it is being sold in Florida by Mecum next week. Now, it's also being sold at no reserve because the current owner, the son, Sean Kernan, does not want to go through this process again. I could see that. He just wants to get it done and sold. So Hagerty also has some interesting quotes about this Mustang. Estimating the value of an iconic car like the Bullitt Mustang can be difficult since it is impossible to know just how much someone is willing to pay for a car that is so ingrained in American pop culture and has never been at auction before, particularly one that was driven by the King of Cool and arguably the greatest car chase in movie history. Certainly that number will be in the millions. There really is no other car to which it can be compared, says automotive expert and author Colin Comer. FYI, he is the author of one of my favorite books, The Complete Book of Shelby Automobiles. It's on my bookshelf behind me. He said, when you put everything together, a cultural icon connected to a movie legend, and it's a Mustang, it really stands alone. Then you consider that most people thought it was long gone, destroyed. It was amazing enough when it came out of hiding 18 months ago in near original condition. Now, for someone to actually have an opportunity to own it for themselves, a car that McQueen couldn't even buy, this is an unprecedented historic event. Now, Steve McQueen famously tried to get this Mustang back in 1977 by sending a letter to the owner. And this is a great example of how not to endear yourself to someone who has something that you want. So it read, Dear Mr. Kernan, again, now that's a horrible way to start a letter. I would like to appeal to you to get back my 68 Mustang. I would like very much to keep it in the family in its original condition as it was used in the film, rather than have it restored, which is simply personal with me. So he's doing okay there. He's going to keep it original. Now it kind of goes, it goes bad here. I would be happy to try, so there's no guarantees. He will try, maybe at least make a phone call, to find you another Mustang similar to the one you have, if there is not too much monies involved in it. He should have never put that in the letter here. Otherwise, we had better forget it. That is a really horrible way to close your selling pitch. Very negative. And then he closed it with kindest regards, I remain very truly yours, Steve McQueen. So I'm going to do the impossible and make a very educated guess on what the Bullitt Mustang will sell for by analyzing 6 data sets. Yes, you heard that correct. 6 data sets. The current muscle car trends, valuation of a non-Bullitt 1968 GT 390 Mustang Fastback, review the top-selling Mustangs and Shelbys of all time, review the recent sales results of movie cars, and calculating and applying the Steve McQueen Multiplier and reviewing a few iconic items that have sold recently. I'll then throw all of this data into my al-gonk-cu-lator to come up with my estimated hammer price, also known as my best guess. So here we go. So Andres Newton, author of the Hagerty Price Guide Index of American Muscle Cars, stated that of Hagerty's 7 primary collector car indices, that's probably wrong, the Muscle Car Index experienced by far the largest drop in the latest update with an 8% fall. In fact, it was the only index to move more than 2% in either direction. No component cars recorded a gain, and nearly half of them fell in value. While all the Chevrolets in the Muscle Car Index saw drops, the Mopars saw the biggest ones. The 1970 Cuda AAR dropped 18%, and the 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible, very rare, among the most valuable of all muscle cars, fell 13%. None of this is cause for panic, however, as most of the significant decreases in the muscle car market, both inside and outside of this index, are for the most expensive cars. Most prices in the broader muscle car market are firm, and the most popular models' popularity among younger enthusiasts should at least keep them that way. So that's from September of this year, or last year now. And of the 15 cars represented, the biggest appreciator was the 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible, which he mentioned took a $700,000 hit in number one condition. It peaked at $3 million in January of 2016, and now is $2.3 million, which is a 23% decline. From May to September, it was down $150,000, or 10.3%. If you look at just the Mustangs that are represented in the index, that's a 1965 Shelby GT350, 1968 GT500 King of the Road, and a 1969 Boss 429, they were only down 0.5% for the same time frame. So a little bit of good news there. The real Bullitt Mustang is unrestored and shows a lot of surface rust, dent stings, and other flaws from being thrown around the San Francisco streets in the movie and the additional 50 years of time in a garage. Hagerty describes a number 4 vehicle as a daily driver with visible flaws to the naked eye. The chrome might have pitting or scratches, the windshield might be chipped, paintwork is imperfect, and perhaps the body has a minor dent. Split seams or a cracked dash, where applicable, might be present. No major parts are missing, but the wheels could differ from the originals, or other non-stock additions might be present. A number 4 vehicle can also be a deteriorated restoration. Fair is the one word that describes a number 4 vehicle. The Bullitt Mustang falls off of Hagerty's chart and is a number 5 car. There's no way you would call the Bullitt Mustang a fair car. Currently, the average value for an everyday 1968 390 GT Mustang Fastback with a factory 4-speed, which adds 10% to the value, for number 1 condition is almost $96,000. Number 2, $79,000. Number 3 condition, around $61,000. And number 4 condition, around $43,000. As I said, this is a number 5 condition, so it falls off of their chart. So the Bullitt Mustang, without its movie provenance or Steve McQueen ownership, I value it around $35,000. So we'll use this base number when factoring our multipliers. So keep this in mind, because I'll have this McQueen multiplier in a minute. I'll have a movie multiplier. Then I'll also have an iconic multiplier to help me figure out what this car is going to sell for. A little bit of good news. The 1968 Mustangs are up 5% from January to September 2019, which goes against overall muscle car trends. So, that's nice news. All right, so just to review the top-selling Mustangs and Shelbys of all time. Let's see, top-selling Mustangs, a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 302 Trans Am Racer, sold for $750,000 in 2016. Then we have a 69 Boss 429 for almost $600,000 in 2013. We have two 69 Boss 429 Mustangs that sold for $550,000 in 15 and 16. And then rounding out the top 5, we have a 1964 Ford Mustang Shorty prototype that sold for $511,000 in 2015. This was a really weird, maroon fastback that was a prototype. They basically took out the rear seats, shortened the wheelbase. It looks really weird, looks really stumpy, but it sold for $500,000. Now, the Boss 429s, there was, three in there. They're down 12% from the May 2017 peak. Now, the top-selling Shelbys are a 1967 Shelby GT500 Super Snake. It sold for $1.3 million in 2013. And then the same car, because there's only one, sold for $2.2 million in 2019, which was an increase of 69% in just 6 years. The hero car from Gone in 60 Seconds, the 1967 Eleanor Shelby GT500, sold for $1 million a few years ago. And a 1966 Mustang Shelby GT350 convertible, one of only 4 made, sold for $742,000 in 2017. That's a really cool car. They just made four different colors. I saw the yellow one down in Pensacola, like in the early 90s. There's a dark green one and a dark blue one. So this is interesting information, but it really doesn't help me out much in figuring out what the Bullitt Mustang will sell for. These are all specialized Mustangs, either Bosses or obviously Shelbys, and very rare Shelbys at that. Probably the closest one would be the Super Snake and the Eleanor. The Eleanor, because it's a movie car. It was one of 11. It's a resto mod, and it sold for $1 million. It's not nearly as iconic as the Bullitt Mustang, so that's a pretty good base point. And then the Super Snake, as it was a one-of-one car with strong provenance, and it was unrestored. The difference there is that that's a factory-built race car. It was in much better shape than the Bullitt Mustang, and in my opinion, the 67 Shelbys are the best-looking Shelbys of all time. The fact that it almost doubled in price in 6 years speaks to the desire of collectors wanting automotive unicorns as the centerpiece of their collection. I think that'll be a big influencer on the Bullitt price. It's definitely a unicorn. So next we're going to review the most recent movie cars. If you go to the blog, I've listed the most recent 25 movie cars that have sold and what they sold for. This will help me factor in my movie multiplier that we can apply to the Mustang price. Now, I'm only picking, I think, 8 cars that I feel are more applicable to Bullitt Mustang. Some of them don't make a lot of sense, like the 65 Shelby Cobra Daytona Coupe from the Redline movie. Well, I don't think the movie had any impact on its price. It's one of 6 Daytona Coupes. It sold for $7.6 million. I think the movie had almost nothing to do with the price, the increase in the price of the Daytona Coupe. So I picked, how many did I say? I picked a handful, and I'll go down these real quick. So the 1966 Batmobile from Batman the movie sold for $4.6 million. This is a pop icon. The show is awesome, campy. Everybody knows about it. It's a fantastic car, incredibly well done by George Barris. I based the multiplier on a replica of this car, so a $100,000 replica. So that makes the movie multiplier for this car 46x, 46 times the base price. The next two are 2 1964 Aston Martin DB5s from the Goldfinger and Thunderball movies. Ironically, they both sold for around $4.6 million. One sold, I think, in 2015, and the other one sold last year. Iconic cars that are in good movies, and these movies, obviously, they're still making James Bond movies. So I based a multiplier on a DB5 in number 1 condition, which is worth $1.45 million. So the movie multiplier for these cars is 3.2x. Now we'll move on down to one of McQueen's cars, a 1970 Porsche 911S from the movie Le Mans, and it sold for $1.3 million. That's a great car in an average movie. The multiplier is based on a base 911S in number 1 condition. That's $72,000. So this was a big movie multiplier, 19.1x. And now we'll move to the 65 Shelby Mustang GT500 from Gone in 60 Seconds. That's the one we talked about earlier for $1 million. That's a great car and an okay movie. The movie was just, it was okay. But it did spawn an entire industry of Eleanor clones. There's just folks that specialize in making these clones of these cars. Now, the actual Eleanor was based on a 67 Fastback Mustang, not a Shelby, thankfully. But I'm going to base the multiplier on a real Shelby. So a 67 Shelby GT500 in number 1 condition is worth $274,000. So the movie multiplier is 3.6x. Next, we'll move to the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona from the movie Joe Dirt. Sold for $900,000. I'm going to say that this is a great car in a really bad movie. I've never actually seen the movie, but IMDb gave it a ranking of 20 out of 100. So they said it was a horrible movie. Now, I based a multiplier on a 69 Charger in number 1 condition, which is worth $236,000. So that makes the movie multiplier 3.8x. Now, 2 more to go. We have a DeLorean from Back to the Future, sold for $541,000. Great looking car that was underpowered and underdeveloped, but it was in a great movie. So I based the multiplier on a 1983 DeLorean in number 1 condition. That is worth $43,300. So this movie multiplier is 12.5 times that price. And then the last one's a 1978 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit, sold for $450,000, personally owned by Burt Reynolds. This is an iconic car that is underpowered, but it was a decent movie, I guess borderline decent movie. So I based a multiplier on a 1978 Trans Am in number 1 condition, which is worth almost $36,000. So this movie multiplier is 12.6x. Now, if you combine all those together, the movie multiplier for all of these cars is only 4.9, which is interesting. So if we based a Bullitt Mustang on this multiplier, which I said the base Bullitt Mustang without the provenance, let's see, that was what, 35 grand? If you base it on this multiplier, the Mustang will sell for $172,710.39. So that's not going to happen. This movie multiplier did not even get the Bullitt Mustang up to $1 million. So we got to throw that one out the window. Now let's move on to the Steve McQueen multiplier. So over his career, McQueen owned many collector cars, and I've actually tracked down 25 of them. There's references to more, and some of them are really cool cars. I just couldn't get any more info. Now, some of these cars were in the movies he was filming, and he liked them so much that when the movie wrapped up, he went ahead and purchased them for his own personal use. He also owned a lot of motorcycles, but this is called the Collector Car Podcast, so I will not review those. To calculate the McQueen multiplier, I will only use the cars that were sold at public auction and calculate the hammer price against the value of the car at the time of the auction. So this is going back in time quite a bit, and thankfully, Hagerty's valuation guide goes back to 2006. So the data was there. So the first 13 cars I will list are the ones from his collection that are not part of the multiplier. This is just more of a FYI. They've never sold at auction, or if they did, I didn't have any comps for comparison. So let's run through these 13 cars real quick. There was a custom 1904 Winton Flyer that was built by Von Dutch for the movie The Relievers. Redlier? There's no L in that. I don't know how to say that. Anyways, one of his most famous cars, a 1956 Jaguar XKSS, was nicknamed the Green Rat. It was changed from the original off-white with red interior, the British racing green with black interior. It looks awesome, but I wish it was in the original color combination. Jay Leno, he drove it for his Jay Leno's Garage a couple years ago. Everyday XKSSs are worth $14 to $15 million, and it's speculated that McQueen's is estimated around $30 million, and it currently resides at the Peterson Museum in California. McQueen also had a 1958 Porsche Super Speedster. That's kind of interesting. He bought it. I won't get it correct, but I think he bought it or sold it to Bruce. I'm drawing a blank on his last name, but he's one of the board of directors for the Peterson Museum, helped get it started back in the day. And there's a picture of him selling it back to McQueen in the 70s, like 77 or something like that. And now Steve McQueen's son owns that car to this day. I love listening to Spike's Car Radio podcast, and his co-host, the real Zuckerman, Paul Zuckerman, he owns a twin of this one. It has a consecutive serial number, identical colors and options, but unfortunately he wrecked his at one point, so it's been significantly rebuilt. Now, another car that Steve McQueen owned was a 1959 Lotus 11. I could find no record of it ever being sold at auction or its current location. He also owned a 1961 Cooper T56 Mark II. He raced it successfully in 1962, and it's currently a part of the Canepa Museum, and it's for sale. So it's one of the, I think, 2 McQueen cars that is either for sale or coming up for sale. McQueen also owned a 1962 Austin Healey Sebring Sprite that was destroyed in the period. It was apparently parked by a racetrack, and someone went careening off the racetrack and destroyed his car. He owned a, it's thought that he owned a 1963 Shelby 289 AC Cobra. Someone from the Cobra Registry, I'll quote them here. It says, an amusing but true fact is that Steve McQueen never actually owned a Cobra. Carroll Shelby did lend him one for a period of time, and that car was CSX 2174. So interesting. So I should probably take that out of this. Anyways, 1967 Baja Boot. This is something that he had purposely built to race. And yeah, it's like 450 horsepower, Chevy engine, four-wheel drive, independent suspension. And it was sold in 2008 for almost $200,000. James Glickenhaus has recently remade these. He's made his own version of the Baja Boot. If you Google it, in 2019, he sold or just launched them. He's going to build, I think, 200 of them for about $250,000. McQueen also had a 1967 Mini Cooper S. That one's MIA. He actually did a color change to an ugly brown with a tan top. He had his second most expensive car in the collection, if he still owned it, a 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4 Nart Spider. So this was one of 10 that were built. They're about $30 million today. He only owned it for a little while, and it was blue Sarah with black trim. So iconic car. He bought it after filming, I believe it was the Thomas Crown Affair, where there was another real one in that movie. He also owned a 1967/68 Con Ferris Myers Mank Dune Buggy. Again, that was seen in the Thomas Crown Affair. Actually, I think it was from the movie. That one is coming up for sale at Amelia Island in March, so we'll see how that one does. He had a 1969 Porsche 908/2 Flunder Spider. I could find that this one actually sold a few years ago for $2.7 million, but I couldn't find any comps for it. He had a 1971 Porsche 911T. That one failed to sell at Christie's 2015 auction. The estimate was $275 to $385. And then he didn't own this car, but I'm going to mention it. 1970 Porsche 917, the most iconic Gulf colored 917K. It was used as a test car for the Le Mans movie and became the star of the movie. So really cool car. Ended up selling for $14 million, but McQueen never actually owned it. Now for the 12 cars that have sold at auction and were used to calculate the McQueen Multiplier. These are in order of build date. So 1950 Hudson Commodore 6 convertible. It's one of only 700 built. And let's see, Bonham sold it at Bonham's. And he wore it. It wasn't in great shape. Let's see. I think I gave it a condition 4. It sold in 2015. The Hagerty value for this car is about $33,000 at the time. It sold for $98,000. So the McQueen Multiplier was 3x. 1951 Chevrolet Skyline Deluxe convertible. This was from Steve McQueen's last movie of his career, The Hunter. So it sold in 1984, in 2003, and 2018. It's condition 3, a pale yellow Chevrolet. It's an older restoration. Let's see, it was purchased and sold in 2 episodes of the Pawn Stars as well. So this one's been bought and sold quite a few times. The last time it sold was in 2018. The value at the time for Hagerty was $33,000. It sold for $126,500. So the multiplier is 3.8. His 1952 Hudson Wasp 2-door sedan sold for $165,000 in 2019. At the time, it was worth about $26,000. So the multiplier was 6.4. He apparently owned 2 other Hudsons, but I couldn't find any information on them. The next one's a 1952 Chevy 3800 pickup truck with a camper. This was known as the Dust Tite. I don't know why. Let's see. It took on significance because it was the last vehicle to take McQueen from his home to the Ventura County Airport to embark on his journey to Mexico for what would be his final cancer surgery. Accompanying him in the camper was the Reverend Billy Graham. That was very interesting. Sold to Bear Jackson in 2016. I'd say a condition 4. It was worth $11,000, but it sold for $60,000, so a multiplier of 5.5. 1958 GMC pickup truck. This was one of his favorites. It sold in Bonhams in 2012. Condition 4. The value was $3,600, and it sold for $92,000. Big multiplier on this one, 25.6. His 1964 Ferrari 250 GT Lusso sold in Christie's in 2007 for $2.3. At the time, $2.3 million. At the time, it was worth $450,000. Multiplier of 5.1. His 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4 was sold for $10.2 million in 2014. The value was $2.2 million, so a multiplier of 4.5. And then his 1967 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow from the Thomas Crown Affair was sold in 2006. The value at the time was $22,500. It sold for over $70,000, so a multiplier of 3.1. All right, we've got four more here. The 1968 Ford GT40 Gulf Mirage, most beautiful GT40 ever. Let's see, that one sold in 2012 for $11 million, and the value at the time was only $2.6 million, so that has a multiplier of 4.3. I believe that car is here in Cincinnati, and I hope to see it soon. A 1970 Porsche 911S. This was delivered new to McQueen on the set of Le Mans for its personal use. It featured in the first 3 minutes of the film, highly optioned car, possibly the best-known non-racing 911S. It sold in 2011 at the Sotheby's auction for $1.4 million. The Hagerty value at the time of the auction was $72,000, so another big multiplier of 19.1. And then a 1972 Mercedes-Benz 300 SEL 6.3. For some reason, Hagerty only had a 1971 in their database, so their value at the time of the auction was just under $40,000. This one sold for almost $40,000. Almost sold for $400,000. It shows a no sale at $375,000. That multiplier is 9.4. And then finally, the 1976 Porsche 930 Turbo. Let's see. It was 2015 Mecum auction, condition number 2. The Hagerty value was $138,000. It sold for $2.145 million, so a multiplier of 15.5. So now I've always heard that the McQueen multiplier was 10 to 15 times the fair market value, but that is not correct by a long shot. Based on all of these cars, these 12 cars that sold at auction, that we know the value at the time of the auction, the McQueen multiplier is actually 4.97. So based on this, we can do some quick math and multiply this by the average value of a number 5 condition 1968 GT390 Mustang Fastback, which I said was $35,000. That means that the Bullitt Mustang would sell for $174,000. Again, that is really close to the movie multiplier, and it's not going to happen. So it's funny, the movie multiplier and the McQueen multiplier were within $2,000 of each other. So there's some good math there, but it's way off when we figure out the Bullitt Mustang. So why are these not applicable? I'm going to say that this is because none of these cars, for the most part, have the Bullitt effect. The ones that did were the ones that sold for the 20-time multiplier. So if you look at some other items that sold that were in the movie Bullitt, they sold for astronomical prices. McQueen's original script sold for $44,000. His, at the time, $25 per soul sunglasses sold for over $70,000. And his brown tweed sports coat from the movie sold for $120,000. So those are some crazy multipliers, and that's the kind of stuff that I feel the Bullitt Mustang will have. So I realized I needed to look elsewhere for comps to help me come up with a realistic number. So I decided to look at iconic items that have sold recently. I mentioned before the Batmobile, I think, is pretty applicable. That sold for $4.4 million, about $100,000 base if you look at the clones. Another car that sold recently that I feel is applicable is a 1935 Duesenberg SSJ that recently sold. I think it was this year. This car was one of two, formerly owned by Gary Cooper, and it sold for $22 million at the Gooding & Company Pebble Beach sale. It set the record for the most expensive pre-war car at auction. It also became the most expensive American car sold. What's interesting about this car, it was original, unrestored, one of two. The other car went to Clark Gable, and the average price for these, most of them sell in the $1.3 to $1.6 million range. The highest price for an SJ prior to this was $3.6 million. Now these are SSJs. I think they had twin superchargers. So if you calculate the base SJ at $1.3 million, the $22 million for this car, the multiplier would be 16.9. I also want to look outside of the world of automobiles. They've had some pretty big watch sales recently that I thought were of note. Most notable was Paul Newman's Rolex, sold for $17 million. The same watch without the Newman connection was worth about 10 grand. So the multiplier on this was almost 1,800 times the base price. Two other watches sold actually just a couple weeks ago. Jack Nicklaus sold his Rolex for $1.2 million. A non-Nicklaus watch would be worth about $12K. So the multiplier on this watch is 102x. And then Marlon Brando's Rolex sold for almost $2 million. And this was a kind of a junky watch for a Rolex. It would have been worth about $4,500 without the Brando connection. So the multiplier on that one was over 400 times base. So what does all this mean? If you take the iconic items, that's like a 33 times multiplier. So the Bullitt Mustang will sell for $1.2 million. I think we're getting close, but we're not quite there. The one thing that hasn't been factored into any of this is the disposable income of prospective buyers. There's a big generational shift occurring right now in the collector car marketplace. If you read any magazines or blog articles, you'll see that any articles written about this, you'll see a lot of things are changing. So you could check out my reviews on my website through previous podcasts. So while the shift is away from the cars from the 40s, 50s, and 60s into the 80s and 90s, I think that the Mustang will buck this trend. The movie was released in 1968, and this Mustang became the icon of every teen and preteen at the time. And then I saw it years later, and it just became an icon to me as well. So today, those kids are in the prime of their disposable income lives. They are retired empty nesters who are enjoying their post-career lifestyle, and they want to have some fun. This is their moment to get the jewel for their collection, and they will bid up for it. I think we'll have a bidding war break out. Because of this, I am going to call the final hammer price for the Bullitt Mustang at $5.6 million. That's higher than Hagerty called it, higher than Dana Mecum called it, and higher than the owner called it. He said around 5. This is a 160 times multiplier that will break all of the records. It will be the most expensive Mustang ever sold at auction, and it will have the highest McQueen or movie multiplier ever. This is an unrepeatable event, and you can join me in 2 weeks on my thoughts on the results and how close or how far off I was in my guess. So either I will be celebrating or I will be crying. So until then, keep your tires straight, your foot on the gas, and eyes on the road, and I hope you all have a wonderful 2020.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.